The November rain had been falling steadily for 3 hours when Anthony Rodriguez decided he couldn't afford to pack up his guitar and head home. Rent was due in 2 days, and despite performing on the corner of Bleecker and McDougal Street for the past 4 hours, he had earned exactly $37, barely enough to cover subway fare for the week, let alone his share of the cramped East Village apartment he shared with 3 other aspiring musicians. At 24, Anthony had been chasing his dream in New York City for 18 months, ever since he'd left his comfortable but soul-crushing job as an accountant in Phoenix. His parents thought he was crazy for giving up financial security to play guitar on street corners, and some days, especially days like this, when the rain soaked through his worn canvas jacket and his fingertips were too numb to properly form chord progressions, Anthony wondered if they might be right. But music wasn't just what Anthony did, it was who he was. He had been writing songs since he was 15, and his acoustic compositions had a raw honesty that occasionally stopped strangers in their tracks. His voice carried the kind of authentic emotion that couldn't be taught or manufactured. It came from someone who had risked everything for art and was living with the daily consequences of that choice. Today's weather had kept foot traffic to a minimum, and the few people who hurried past were focused on getting out of the rain rather than stopping to listen to live music. Anthony had played his entire repertoire twice, trying everything from popular covers to his original material, but the combination of miserable weather and pre-Thanksgiving travel had left Greenwich Village unusually empty. Just one more song, Anthony told himself, water dripping from the brim of his baseball cap as he prepared to pack up his guitar. Maybe someone will stop. He began playing Cardigan by Taylor Swift, a song he had learned because several people had requested it over the past few months. Anthony's interpretation was slower and more melancholic than the original, transformed into something that sounded more like a folk ballad about loss and longing. His voice carried easily despite the rain, rich and expressive in a way that revealed years of dedicated practice and natural talent. What Anthony didn't know was that Taylor Swift herself was walking through the village that afternoon, bundled in a heavy coat and knit hat that rendered her completely anonymous in the gray November weather. She had been having a difficult week, feeling disconnected from her music and overwhelmed by the constant pressure of fame. The idea of being able to walk through the city unrecognized, experiencing the world as just another person rather than a global celebrity, had drawn her out into the rain. Taylor had been planning to duck into a coffee shop when she heard the familiar opening chords of Cardigan being played with an interpretation that was completely different from her recorded version. The voice singing her lyrics was male, deeper, and infused with a melancholy that transformed the song into something that felt both familiar and entirely new. She stopped walking and stood under a small awning about 20 feet away from Anthony, listening as he performed her song with such authentic emotion that it felt like he was telling his own story rather than singing someone else's lyrics. The rain provided a natural soundtrack that enhanced the intimacy of his performance, creating an atmosphere that was both lonely and beautiful. "I've been spending the last 8 months thinking about you, but now I'm thinking about me," Anthony sang, and in his voice, Taylor heard not just her original meaning but layers of interpretation that she had never considered. This wasn't just someone covering her song, this was an artist finding his own truth in her lyrics. As Anthony reached the bridge, Taylor found herself stepping closer, drawn by the quality of his musicianship and the genuine emotion in his delivery. She could see that his guitar case contained only a few bills and some coins, suggesting that this wasn't just casual street performance, but someone genuinely working to earn a living through his art. When the song ended, Anthony looked around hopefully, but the street remained largely empty except for a few people hurrying past with umbrellas. He began to pack up his guitar, clearly discouraged by the lack of audience and earnings from his afternoon of performing in miserable conditions. "That was beautiful," Taylor said, approaching him while keeping her face partially hidden under her hat. "Your arrangement of that song was incredible." Anthony looked up, surprised to hear genuine praise rather than the polite acknowledgement he usually received from passers-by. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of performing in the damp air. I know it's probably not what the songwriter intended, but I tried to find my own way into it. I think any songwriter would be honored to hear their work interpreted with that much understanding and emotion. Taylor replied carefully. How long have you been playing music? Professionally? About 1.5 years, but I've been writing and playing since I was a teenager, Anthony said, continuing to pack up his equipment. This weather's been rough for business, though. Might call it a day. What's your story? Taylor asked, genuinely curious about the circumstances that had brought this talented musician to a rain-soaked street corner. Anthony paused in his packing, looking at this stranger who seemed genuinely interested rather than just making polite conversation. I gave up a career in accounting to try to make it as a musician. Some days that feels like the smartest thing I ever did. And some days, he gestured to the empty street and his nearly empty guitar case, it feels like the dumbest. But you keep doing it anyway, Taylor observed. Yeah, because when it works, when someone stops and really listens, when a song connects with somebody, it feels like the most important thing in the world, even if it's just for 3 minutes on a street corner. Taylor felt a familiar recognition. This was exactly how she had felt about music before. Fame complicated everything. When songwriting was purely about expression rather than commercial expectations. Can I ask you something? Do you ever perform your original material, or mostly covers? Both, Anthony said. Covers pay better because people recognize them, but I write my own songs too. They're more personal though, harder to connect with strangers. Would you mind playing one of your originals? Taylor asked. I'd love to hear what you write about. Anthony looked at her with curiosity. Most people who stopped to listen to street musicians wanted familiar songs, not experimental material from unknown artists. Are you sure? It's pretty different from the covers. I'm sure, Taylor said, settling against the building's brick wall despite the rain. I love hearing new music. Anthony pulled his guitar back out and spent a moment tuning it properly. This one's called Subway Dreams, he said. It's about coming to New York with big plans and discovering that the city doesn't care about your aspirations. What followed was 3.5 minutes of pure, honest songwriting that left Taylor completely speechless. Anthony's original composition was sophisticated in its simplicity, with lyrics that painted vivid pictures of struggle, hope, and the daily reality of pursuing art in an indifferent world. His melody was haunting and memorable, and his voice carried the song with a kind of authentic vulnerability that most professional artists spent years trying to achieve. Subway Dreams and Corner Stages, playing songs for strangers' wages, Anthony sang, his voice cutting through the sound of rain on pavement. Gave up everything I knew for a shot at something true. The song was clearly autobiographical, chronicling his journey from financial security to artistic uncertainty, with honest detail that made every line feel lived in rather than constructed. Taylor recognized the craft in his songwriting, the way he used specific imagery to convey universal emotions, the way his melody supported rather than overwhelmed his lyrics, the way he had structured the song to build emotional intensity without becoming melodramatic. When Subway Dreams ended, Taylor was quiet for several moments, processing what she had just heard. This wasn't just a talented street musician, this was a genuine artist whose work deserved a much wider audience than the few people who happened to walk past his corner. That was extraordinary, Taylor said finally. You're not just a musician, you're a real songwriter. That song should be heard by thousands of people, not just whoever happens to walk by in the rain. Anthony smiled sadly. Thanks, but getting songs heard is the hardest part. Playing them is easy compared to finding people who want to listen. What if you had someone to sing with? Taylor asked suddenly. Would you mind if I joined you for another song? You sing? Anthony asked, surprised. A little, Taylor said, which was perhaps the understatement of the decade. I write songs too. Maybe we could try something together? Anthony looked at her more closely, noticing for the first time that despite her casual dress, there was something about her presence that suggested she might have more musical experience than she was letting on. Sure, he said. What would you like to sing? Could we try Cardigan again? But this time as a duet? I'd love to hear how it sounds with harmony vocals. As Anthony began playing the opening chords again, Taylor started singing softly, her voice blending perfectly with his despite the fact that they had never performed together before. Her years of professional experience allowed her to find harmony lines that enhanced rather than competed with Anthony's lead vocals, creating a version of the song that was more beautiful than either of them could have achieved alone. Vintage tea, brand new phone, high heels on cobblestones. They sang together, their voices intertwining in a way that transformed the rain-soaked street corner into something approaching magical. Taylor's harmony added depth and richness to Anthony's melody, while his interpretation brought new emotional layers to lyrics she had written years earlier. A small crowd began to gather despite the rain, drawn by the unexpected beauty of the duet. People stopped under storefronts and awnings, listening to what sounded like two professional musicians creating something spontaneous and special. Several listeners pulled out their phones to record, sensing that they were witnessing something unique. "When you are young, they assume you know nothing," Taylor sang, and in the context of Anthony's arrangement, the words took on new meaning about the challenges of being a young artist trying to be taken seriously in a competitive industry. As the song built toward its emotional climax, Taylor found herself singing with more passion and authenticity than she had felt in months. The combination of anonymity, unexpected collaboration, and Anthony's genuine artistry reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. When Cardigan ended, the small crowd that had gathered applauded enthusiastically, and several people dropped money into Anthony's guitar case. More importantly, Anthony was staring at Taylor with an expression of amazement and growing recognition. "Your voice," he said slowly, "sounds really familiar. And the way you knew those harmonies perfectly." Taylor felt the moment of truth approaching. She could maintain her anonymity, thank Anthony for the collaboration, and disappear back into the rain. Or she could trust this genuine, talented artist with her real identity. "Anthony," she said, pulling back her hat slightly so he could see her face more clearly, "I need to tell you something." As recognition dawned across Anthony's features, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief to wonder. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You're Taylor Swift. But why? How are you?" "I was walking through the neighborhood and heard you playing my song," Taylor explained. "But more than that, I heard you making it into something new and beautiful. And then when you played your original song, Anthony, you're incredibly talented. You shouldn't be playing on street corners just to make rent." The small crowd that had gathered was beginning to realize what was happening. Whispers of recognition spread through the group as people recognized Taylor's face and voice, but instead of chaos, there was a sense of reverence for the musical moment they had just witnessed. "I can't believe this is real," Anthony said, shaking his head in amazement. "I was just trying to make enough money for groceries, and now Taylor Swift is telling me I'm talented." "You are talented," Taylor confirmed. "But more than that, you're an authentic artist with something important to say. That song you wrote, Subway Dreams, it captures something true about the experience of pursuing art in this city. People need to hear that." She paused, looking at Anthony, and then at the crowd that had gathered. "I want to do something, if you're willing. I want to record a version of Subway Dreams with you. Not as a favor, but as a collaboration between artists. Your song, your vision, but with my resources, to help it reach the audience it deserves." Anthony was speechless, trying to process the surreal nature of what was happening. "Are you serious? You'd want to record my song?" "I'm completely serious," Taylor replied. "But first, I want to do something else. This crowd that's gathered, they came here because they heard beautiful music being made by two people who love songwriting. Let's give them a few more songs before we talk about the future." What followed was an impromptu concert that lasted nearly an hour, with Taylor and Anthony performing duets of both his original compositions and her songs, creating arrangements on the spot and finding musical compatibility that surprised both of them. The crowd grew as word spread through social media that Taylor Swift was performing on a Greenwich Village street corner, but the atmosphere remained intimate and respectful. Anthony's confidence grew with each song as he realized that his musical instincts and Taylor's experience created something special together. Her harmonies enhanced his original songs in ways that revealed new layers of meaning, while his interpretations of her material brought fresh perspectives that excited her as a songwriter. "You know what strikes me most about your music?" Taylor told Anthony between songs as they took a brief break. "It's completely honest. You're not trying to sound like anyone else or write what you think people want to hear. You're just telling your truth, and that's the hardest thing to do in music." "That's all I know how to do," Anthony replied. "I never learned how to write anything except what I actually feel." "Don't ever learn," Taylor said firmly. "That authenticity is what makes your music special, and it's what made me stop walking and listen to you in the rain." As their impromptu performance wound down, Taylor made sure that Anthony's guitar case was overflowing with donations from the crowd that had gathered. But more importantly, she had connected him with her management team and arranged for a recording session where they could properly capture Subway Dreams and several of his other original compositions. "This feels like a dream," Anthony said as they prepared to part ways. "This morning I was worried about making rent, and now you still need to worry about making rent until we get that recording session scheduled," Taylor said with a smile. "But Anthony, I want you to remember something. What happened today didn't happen because I'm famous and you're not. It happened because you're a real artist who is making beautiful music in the rain, and real music recognizes real music regardless of circumstances." The video footage of their street corner collaboration went viral within hours, but the story that captured public imagination wasn't about celebrity charity or random encounters with fame. It was about the power of authentic music to create connections between artists, and about what happens when someone successful chooses to use their platform to amplify voices that deserve to be heard. 6 months later, Anthony Rodriguez released his debut EP, produced with Taylor's support but showcasing his own artistic vision. Subway Dreams became the lead single, and the acoustic version they had recorded together on that rainy afternoon became the album's hidden track. The EP's success led to a record deal, touring opportunities, and the kind of artistic recognition that Anthony had been chasing since he arrived in New York. But perhaps more meaningful than the commercial success was what the collaboration had taught both artists. For Taylor, working with Anthony had reminded her of the pure joy of making music with someone who shared her passion for honest songwriting. For Anthony, the experience had validated years of dedication to his craft and given him the confidence to continue pursuing his artistic vision even when circumstances were difficult. The corner of Bleecker and McDougal, where they had first performed together, became a regular stop for both musicians whenever they were in the village. A small plaque was eventually installed that read, "Music happens here, where rain couldn't stop songs, and songs changed lives." Anthony continued to perform on street corners throughout the city, not because he had to anymore, but because he believed that music belonged in public spaces where anyone could discover it. His story became an inspiration to other struggling artists in New York, proof that genuine talent combined with persistence could lead to unexpected opportunities. Years later, when Anthony had established himself as a respected recording artist and touring musician, he would often tell audiences about the rainy November day when Taylor Swift stopped to listen to him play her song on a street corner. But he always emphasized that the most important thing about that encounter wasn't meeting a celebrity. It was discovering that authentic artistic expression could create connections that transcended fame, success, or commercial considerations. "She didn't stop because she recognized me," Anthony would tell his audiences. "She stopped because she recognized the music. And that taught me that the most important thing any artist can do is stay true to their own voice, even when it feels like nobody's listening. Because somewhere, somebody always is." For Taylor, the memory of Anthony's interpretation of Cardigan and his original song, Subway Dreams, became touchstones for her own artistic development. They reminded her that the best songs are often born from struggle, authenticity, and the willingness to be vulnerable in public spaces where rejection is possible, but connection is always worth pursuing. Their collaboration continued over the years, with Anthony contributing to several of Taylor's albums and Taylor appearing as a guest on Anthony's recordings. But their creative partnership was built on mutual respect and shared artistic values, rather than celebrity endorsement or marketing strategy. The rainy afternoon when they met became legendary in New York's street music community, not because of who was involved, but because it captured something essential about what happens when authentic artists meet and recognize each other's dedication to their craft. Their story proved that great music can happen anywhere, on the biggest stages in the world, or on rain-soaked street corners where two people decide that making music together matters more than staying dry. And whenever Anthony performed Subway Dreams in concert venues around the world, he would always dedicate it to Taylor, who taught me that the best collaborations happen when two artists forget about everything except the music, and to everyone who has ever been brave enough to play their truth in the rain. The Greenwich Village street corner where it all began continued to host musicians from around the world, many of whom came specifically because they had heard the story of the rainy day when a struggling street musician and a global superstar discovered that they spoke the same musical language. But for Anthony Rodriguez and Taylor Swift, it would always be remembered simply as the place where authentic music created authentic connection, proving that the most powerful performances happen not when everything goes according to plan, but when artists are brave enough to be vulnerable together in unexpected places. Sometimes the most transformative musical experiences happen not in sold-out arenas or professional studios, but on rain-soaked street corners, where authentic artists meet and recognize each other's dedication to honest expression. Anthony's willingness to keep playing despite miserable weather and minimal audience proved that real musicians create not for recognition or money, but because music is how they process and share their truth with the world. Taylor's decision to stop and listen, then to collaborate and ultimately support Anthony's career, demonstrated that success creates the responsibility to lift up other artists who are still fighting for their chance to be heard. The most beautiful thing about their encounter wasn't the celebrity discovery narrative, but the reminder that authentic artistry recognizes itself regardless of circumstances, and that the best music often emerges from the courage to remain vulnerable, in spaces where connection seems impossible, but magic is always possible.